Arc 3.0 is here, and there's no denying it is incredible at ability spam. We all can agree on that, but there are a lot of questions when it comes to how to best build it out in PvE. Do we use Storm Trance or Chaos Reach? Crown of Tempest or Fallen Sunstar? Storm or Pulse Grenades? Lightning Surge or Arc Souls? Which fragments? How many traces? How much ability energy do we really need? What about survivability, healing, endgame builds for master content? I've seen people say there's a cooldown on the ionic traces from the aspect and Warlocks got screwed. There's no cooldown on it. Okay, deep breath. I've been playing nothing but Arc to find the answers to these very questions, and the answer to all of them is yes. What I mean by that is stormcallers have a bit of an identity crisis. At its core, Arc 3.0 wants you to play fast and aggressive, becoming amplified and zipping around the battlefield, tossing grenades, getting into the enemy's face to drop a lightning surge, and just zapping everything, rinse and repeat. This fantasy plays very well in at-level content, but this is almost the polar opposite of how you have to play master or GM level content when you're 25 levels below the enemy. No matter how much healing and damage reduction I cram in, the aggressive Lightning Surge playstyle is very dangerous to run, especially against beefier targets. Against groups of minor enemies that aren't shielded, it can work fine, sure. But the second you come up against a set of champions or beefy cabal with solar shields, this build comes to a screeching halt as you're forced to do what everyone does in this content: hunker down in a rift behind cover. After playing with dozens of different builds, exotics, weapons, testing combinations of mods, aspects, and fragments, I've gravitated towards building Stormcaller in two completely different ways depending on if you're playing at-level content or master-level content. Let's talk at-level content first. First up, which exotic is best? When you're able to plow through enemies easily, Crown of Tempest takes the lead when it comes to ability regen. You're still going to have a ton of ionic traces coming at you, but now 550% increased ability regen. All you need is tier 6 or 7 discipline and strength, and you can comfortably spam your abilities back and forth forever. Because we're using Crown of Tempest and it's safe to get close to enemies, I prefer Storm Trance as it lasts an insanely long time. Hopefully the damage ramp up gets fixed soon and it'll be even better. We're going to want Healing Rift for some survivability. Whichever glide you like. We'll take the Chain Lightning melee for its faster cooldown, and for at-level type content I prefer Storm Grenades for the wider area they cover, although you can't go wrong with Pulse Grenades either. Aspects, we will want Lightning Surge and Electrostatic Mind. Electrostatic Mind is going to allow all our ability kills or jolted target kills to create ionic traces. Now, I've seen rumblings of people saying there is a 10-second cooldown on ionic traces from Electrostatic Mind, which is just flat wrong. As you can see here, I'm getting back-to-back traces from jolted kills via Volt Shot and from my grenade kills. There is a tiny hidden cooldown of about 1 second, but otherwise you can chain them very well together. What does have a cooldown, however, is the fragment Spark of Ions, which everybody gets. And you can see the cooldown will pop up whenever you trigger it. The ionic trace from the fragment does stack with Electrostatic Mind, so when the fragment isn't on cooldown, those jolted kills from either abilities or Volt Shot will generate 2 ionic traces per kill. Okay, so obviously Spark of Ions is our first fragment, and along with it we will pick up Spark of Shock to allow our grenades to jolt and create that extra ionic trace. From here, you have some options as it depends on where you want to take the build. Spark of Magnitude seems nice, but in at-level content the base grenades plus jolt pretty much kill everything anyway. Spark of Resistance could be good for the free 25% damage reduction and 10 strength, especially if you run low resilience and find yourself wanting more survivability, although again, at-level content it might be overkill. You could go with some of the blinding fragments, although again everything dies so fast that being blinded is kinda redundant. Spark of Amplitude could be a good pick, as you will be generating a ton of orbs from multi-kills. If you want to use an arc weapon that isn't Cold Heart or Delicate Tomb, you could pop on Spark of Discharge, so any arc weapon can create an ionic trace. Otherwise, take something for the free stats like Spark of Feedback or Spark of Volts. Let's talk weapons. Obvious candidates are Cold Heart and Delicate Tomb, both of which can create ionic traces on their own, but any arc weapon can synergize well if you use the Blinding or Spark of Discharge fragments. The new seasonal Scout Rifle and Sidearm both can roll with Volt Shot, which allows them to create ionic traces on their own, which is just awesome. There's also the Ikelos SMG, Salvager Salvo, 4th Horseman. You can even roll with a kinetic weapon with Osmosis. Tons of great options. What about mods? There's a bunch of ways you can go. You really have a ton of freedom with your mods because all our ability regen is already taken care of. Unless you want to do something like a melee focus build where you spam Lightning Surge. Then you can rock Melee Wellmaker, Bountiful Wells, Well of Striking, and maybe 2 more Melee Wellmakers. Both heavy-handed and melee kickstart don't work well with the slide melee, as the ionic traces or wells will instantly regen our energy, meaning heavy-handed and kickstart won't have a chance to proc. So it's better to just create a ton of wells if spamming the melee is your goal. Otherwise, if you want a more balanced build where you cycle between grenades and melees, we could do some fun stuff like adding in infinite ammo to the new exotic fusion rifle Delicate Tomb. We do this with heavy-handed secondary perk Lock and Load. To this we can add some survivability. If we want healing over time, we can toss on Explosive Wellmaker, 2 copies of Well of Life, and Elemental Time Dilation so that our grenades and melees create solar wells, and we get healing over time for 16 seconds. Or we could go with Reaping Wellmaker, a couple copies of Well of Tenacity, Elemental Time Dilation to get 40% damage reduction for up to 15 seconds. If you want even more damage reduction, you can toss on Striking Light for 25% while sprinting. There's a ton of freedom with your mods. Check out the example builds I put together and feel free to mix and match depending on your preference. They're all a ton of fun to play. And now, what I'm sure most of you are here for, the Endgame build. I call this build the Soul Star Sentry, and it is the polar opposite of the earlier builds. While in easier content we can play super aggressive with Lightning Surge and easily keep up Crown of Tempest buff, this playstyle does not bode well as enemies become tankier, making it harder to both chain kills, and you're going to get absolutely shredded while out in the open, no matter how much damage reduction and healing we tack on. This is where Fallen Sunstar surpasses Crown of Tempest. Crown wants you to keep its buff up for maximum effect, but Fallen Sunstar just doesn't care. You still get 20% to all of your abilities from each ionic trace, and we're going to be creating a ton of ionic traces. Plus, if you're with a fire team, you'll be feeding them energy as well. We're also going to swap our super to Chaos Reach. In harder content, you don't want to be out in the open with Storm Trance. Chaos Reach just becomes the safer pick, as you can easily stay back near cover when you cast it, and this further reduces the need for Crown of Tempest. The focus of Arc in harder content switches from fast and aggressive melee-centric to doubling down on our grenades and playing from range. We will be able to get 95% of our grenade energy right back when we combine the 40% we'll get from 2 ionic traces, the 30% from firepower, and another 25% from bomber. All we then need is an arc soul or melee to create another trace, a kill with our demolitionist weapon, or you can just wait the 5 seconds and our grenade is back. We're going to switch over to the ball lightning melee as we, again, don't want to get too close to enemies in master content. We're also going to switch from the storm to pulse grenade. Pulse grenades will deal much more total damage over time against these beefier targets, especially as we tack on some fragments, and they actually can cover a surprisingly wide area when they can jolt. Also in this new playstyle, we will be dropping Lightning Surge for Arc Souls. Arc Souls, especially while amplified, actually put in some really good work. Here they are on a Master Lost Sector where I'm 25 levels below. As a baseline, they're just adding free DPS, but they're also going to automatically pop any arc shields around you, and they count as an ability kill to proc an ionic trace. All it takes is a few ionic traces to get our entire rift back, so we're always going to have an arc soul passively putting in work for us, regenning our other abilities, plus keeping us amplified. Our fragments are going to focus 100% on beefing up our pulse grenade. We want Spark of Magnitude so that they last longer, Spark of Shock so that they jolt, and Spark of Ion so that they create that extra ionic trace. The last fragment is kind of a freebie. Spark of Resistance could be nice for the extra damage reduction, although you don't really want to be that close to enemies in harder content, so you might not even trigger it most of the time, but sometimes that just can't be helped, so surviving an extra hit or two is really nice. You could slot in something like Spark of Discharge to get ionic traces from any arc weapon, or as I'm currently doing, run Spark of Feedback for the 10 resilience so that I can both hit 100 resilience and 100 recovery. Otherwise I would have to drop some recovery, which I don't want to do. That's the subclass. Let's move on to the rest of the build. The weapon at the heart of this all is Nezarec's Whisper. This is going to add some much needed survivability and utility. Now this weapon can be crafted, but luckily I managed to snag a god roll which is demolitionist and unstoppable force. As this is a grenade build, demolitionist fixes the slow reload on glaives, as every grenade we toss will automatically reload the glaive. And even though we're not taking the fragment that'll let us generate ionic traces with the weapon, demolitionist will give us 20% of our grenade energy on every kill, giving us amazing synergy with the build. As we're blocking with the glaive, we'll activate unstoppable force, which gives us a 30% damage boost on the projectile, and this will massively help against harder enemies. Plus, we'll have our supercharged arc soul putting in work while we're blocking, truly making us that arc sentry. You can survive an insane amount of firepower while you're in a rift with a glaive. Here I am 25 levels under in a Master Lost sector, and I'm just eating everything. Alright, let's talk stats for Endgame. You will want to max out resilience and then get recovery and discipline as high as you can. Nothing else matters. This will give us high damage reduction and max uptime on our rifts, arc souls, and grenades. You'll need a fragment to do so, but right now I'm hitting tier 10 resilience, tier 10 recovery, with tier 8 discipline, and the build feels amazing. So don't feel bad about not hitting tier 10 discipline. Trust me, survivability is much more important. Alright, it's mod time. I've gone through so many iterations of this build. This is what I finally landed on as my favorite. As we are grenade focused, our helmet will be solar so we can slot in ashes to assets for bonus super energy from grenade kills. We're also going to run one harmonic siphon mod so our arc weapons will create orbs of power, and finally elemental ordnance so that our grenades can create a well. Our gloves will be solar. We've got one free slot open for a champion mod, which can then be paired with an exotic weapon that can deal with champions, or the seasonal grenade mod that will let our grenades stun overloads. We can slot in focusing strike or fastball if you prefer. The combat mod here is firepower. Our chest will be solar so we can run another copy of firepower for 30% total grenade energy. Don't forget your resist mods for the 15% damage reduction against the chosen damage type. I like the seasonal combo mod plus either sniper or concussive dampener. Our leg armor is arc so we can slot in seeking wells. I've also got glaive scavenger to keep our glaive ammo topped off, as well as invigoration to get melee energy from an orb of power. If you don't happen to have seeking wells, you can instead make this armor piece solar, and instead run something like recuperation and bountiful wells. Finally, our bond is solar so we can run bomber. This gives us a whopping 25% of our grenade energy when we drop a rift. A second copy only adds another 5%, so unless you're running surge detonators, I like to run healthy finisher, which is an amazing survival option. This allows your finisher to heal you to full. Finally, we're going to run elemental charge so that collecting a well allows us to become charged with light. This build is pretty amazing, and not just in harder content. You can run it everywhere and spam grenades, or while in a Master Lost sector or GM Nightfall, safely sit back in a rift near cover with our arc buddy, chucking our very powerful grenades from range, tanking everything with our glaive shield. Each pulse grenade can generate a ton of ionic traces and wells because of how long they last. This lets them get past that 1 second internal cooldown. The traces and wells will track to you, keeping all our abilities topped off and allowing us to become charged with light. Each glaive kill gives us 20% grenade energy from demolitionist. Each grenade we toss reloads our glaive. It's amazing synergy. And we'll have a linear fusion rifle and chaos reach for our single target damage, which we can cast both safely from a distance, and the build just works. Stormcaller 3.0 feels amazing in at-level content. It's a ton of fun aggressively spamming abilities, especially the melee. But Arc's identity becomes foggy in harder content, where that playstyle just doesn't work most of the time. But that's fine, we can pivot the subclass to compensate, and Arc can actually do really well in master level content if the activity lends itself to Arc's strengths, which are dealing with, weaker hordes of enemies like against the Hive or Fallen, against a lot of Arc shields, and of course if there's an Arc burn. It's not going to be better than Stasis, Void, or Solar in every situation. Something like Stasis doesn't really care what you're up against, it's agnostic, it does well pretty much everywhere, and the same with Solar to an extent. But I definitely think there's now a place for Arc to shine in all its 3.0 glory. But tell me what you guys think. Have you tried Arc in some harder content yet? What variations of the builds do you think you'll try? What are some of your favorite weapons and mod setups to pair with Arc this season? Sound off in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one.